Senator Cory Booker has dropped out of the presidential race. The New Jersey Democrat made the announcement earlier today on his Twitter page. His campaign posted this video to YouTube.
I'm suspending my campaign for president with the same spirit with which it began. But for now, I want to say thank you. Campaigning over this last year has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. Meeting you, meeting people across this country who believe, who know that we may have challenges right now in our nation, but together we will rise.
Booker's announcement comes just 3 weeks ahead of the Iowa caucuses and 1 day before the next Democratic presidential primary debate, which will be held in Des Moines. For more on all this, I want to bring in Antjuan Seawright and Isaac Stanley-Becker. Antjuan is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Isaac is a national politics reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. Antjuan, let me start with you. Senator Booker did not qualify for Tuesday's debate, but is there more behind him dropping out?
No, I think that he realizes kind of where the future could line up for him. And I think that we will see other people drop out of this race as we get closer to primary and caucus races. But let me say this, thank you to Cory Booker, because this party, this process, this country, and I believe the final Democratic product will be better because Cory Booker decided to get into this race and to take up space. He was able to elevate the conversation around many things and many issues, particularly those who impact the political concrete of the Democratic Party, African-American voters. And I think in the end, it will be because of Cory Booker's experiences that we will be better off long term.
And how will his absence impact the Democratic field now?
I think we're going to miss kind of some of the things he brought to the table. A sense of love, a sense of hope, a sense of peace, and a sense of unity. I think he was part of the glue. In spite of the differences on the stage that kind of held this party and held this process together. And no doubt, I think the void will be bigger because of Cory Booker's absence. And definitely when you think about a constituency that's so important to me, African-American men, who will be a swing constituency in any election going forward, I think there will be a void because Cory and Kamala were one of the two people very early on who elevated the conversation around African-American men.
Well, speaking to that, there is still one African-American candidate left, correct?
Yes. Oh, that's right. Deval Patrick.
I can't forget about that. That's right. So, you know, it doesn't seem like he's going to go very far, but at least there is someone, you know.
Well, I hope that Governor Patrick puts together a real campaign operation that will allow him to effectively compete and hopefully make the debate stage and raise the issues of some of the candidates who are no longer in the race that were important, particularly to the African-American community, because there will be a large conversation saying that the field is not diverse and we will lose some gravity around the issues that these candidates of color raise. However, I think that the candidates on the stage now or who are still in the race can still raise those issues and speak to them.
And it seems definitely important for Democrats that those conversations continue, it seems to me.
Absolutely, because the most loyal voting bloc in this party are African-American voters, and we cannot go through another election cycle without having the issues that are so important to that constituency not being elevated to the priority chart.
And Isaac, I want to turn to you now. In a recent article, you write Iowa Democrats are, quote, paralyzed by fear of choosing the wrong candidate to take on Trump. You mentioned a new poll showing only 40% of likely caucus goers having made up their minds. Now, that is far fewer than in 2016. So why are people having such a hard time deciding who they will vote for in 2020? Is it all coming down to who can beat Trump?
That is a huge factor, and the difficulty of answering that question is proving sort of too burdensome for many likely caucus goers in Iowa who are saying that they are just having a really difficult time weighing these different contenders and trying to think through, you know, who is best positioned to take on the president in November.
And can you give us a little explanation of how the Iowa caucuses are so different and how a voter's second choice actually matters in the Iowa caucuses?
Right. It's a somewhat kind of opaque process. You know, it's this participatory night, winter weeknight in Iowa, where people gather all across the state in school gymnasiums and church basements and other locations like that, and they really discuss and debate with their neighbors and friends, and split off into these factions. And it matters people's second choice and even third choice, and how hard or soft their support is for their first choice, because there's a lot of kind of in-person jostling that goes on. People can be convinced to move over, and if you end up in a group that isn't viable, there's a sort of a mathematical threshold for that in terms of actually getting delegates going forward, then you can what's called realign and kind of attach to a different group that is proving more formidable.
A fascinating process, Antjuan, and it looks like especially this year it's going to be down to the wire jostling going on in Iowa. But as to the earlier point that we were discussing, who can beat Donald Trump? How are the frontrunner candidates addressing this?
Well, I think they're trying to speak to a broader audience as they campaign in the presidential preference primary. You see issues, you see candidates start to pivot away from what may be politically sexy among Democratic primary voters to speaking to those who will likely participate in a general election with a broad 50,000-foot message that speaks to, I think, the ears of the entire country. And we've seen that from the very beginning for Vice President Biden. But I think the bigger point through all of this, when you talk about general election, is putting together the proper coalition that can win not just the election, but win the electoral college. And I think candidates are starting to prioritize that in their campaigning and in their messaging. And so you see them start to speak to things that tickles the ears of independents.
In what way? Can you give me an example?
Well, I think on the issue of healthcare, I think people realize early on that throwing out the system, the entire system we have in place, and saying we're going to move to a Medicare for all system is not so popular as people anticipated in this primary. So I think you see people moving away from that message to speaking to the majority of the voices in the party when you're talking about fixing what we have and strengthening that. That's one example. I think when you hear this idea of free college, I think there's some conversation of rolling that back to something more reasonable, speaking to making college affordable and free technical college, which is agreed upon by Democrats and Republicans. I think you're starting to see, as it should, the mood and the temperature of the messaging changing within the primary process.
So, Isaac, is the general assumption then that the undecideds are more moderate, and is that a correct assumption?
I think that's a sort of untested proposition. I think the campaigns disagree on that point. I spoke to people with former Vice President Biden's campaign who said that that's certainly what their data is showing them, that these are people who really do prize electability and have more moderate positions on questions of health care. But contrary to that, Senator Sanders' campaign says that they think that there's many undecided people who are more working class voters in Iowa and elsewhere who are persuaded by a more left-wing message. So it's really difficult to tell, and I think in some ways it even goes deeper than that. It's a question of uncertainty about what sort of characteristics are most important in challenging Trump, whether that's experience, whether that's ideological consistency, whether that's preparedness and a set of detailed policy plans, or whether that's kind of excitement based on a sort of fresh face or a generational change. I think there's even a lack of clarity about those sorts of fundamental questions.
So, Antjuan, I see you want to weigh in on this point.
Yeah, because I don't think it's a us versus them conversation. I think we pride ourselves in being the big tent Democratic Party because there's room for the progressive message. There's also room for the centrist message. And I think that sometimes gets lost when you're in a very intense presidential primary battle.
So you don't buy the argument that undecideds tend to be more moderate? You don't buy that?
No, I think they fall in line with where they think that the bigger game will end up being played, and that's on a general election.
They're holding a wait-and-see attitude.
Absolutely. And think about this. We were successful in 2018 in places that Donald Trump was successful in 2016, not because we ran a left-wing message, but we spoke to, I think, the pragmatic hearts and minds of this country. And where we had success is in places where we have to win in order to keep the majority in Congress, but also be competitive when we think about the electoral college. And so we should not not get into the business of recreating the steering wheel. Instead, we should drive the steering wheel with the hands we know that work.
Love that. All right, so Isaac, there will only be 6 candidates on stage during tomorrow's debate. What are voters in Iowa looking for? Will they be watching very, very closely?
I think they will be. I think everyone will be grateful to have a slightly more manageable stage tomorrow night and an ability to drill down and really figure out some differences among these candidates. I think that we're likely to see a larger than usual focus on foreign policy and foreign affairs given the unfolding situation in Iran, and certainly different campaigns have suggested that they think that benefits them. The former vice president because of his experience on the world stage, Senator Sanders because of his opposition to the Iraq War. So I think that's likely to be a heated and interesting topic for tomorrow night.
And we will be here, right, Antjuan? Antjuan Seawright and Isaac Stanley-Becker, thanks to both of you so much.
Thank you.